Hi, this is Brad Linder with Liliputing, and this is a Samsung Series 9 notebook, or ultrabook, which is a thin and light laptop. Has a list price of about $1,000, but I picked one up on Black Friday for about $800. Now you can get it from Amazon for $830, which is a pretty good price for a notebook that combines portability and performance. It's got a 13.3-inch 1600 by 900 pixel display, an Intel Core i5 Sandy Bridge processor, so it's a last generation chip, but that's one of the reasons why the price is relatively low for a device that has 5 to 6 hours of battery life in my testing, and weighs 2.5 pounds, and measures just half an inch thick. Now if you're wondering what half an inch looks like, this is a Google Nexus 7 tablet, and you can see that the full laptop computer isn't really much different in terms of size. It has a couple of sacrifices in order to keep things thin. There's not a lot of ports, so we've got a headset jack, USB 2.0 over here. I believe this is a display port. USB 3.0, so just 2 USB ports altogether. And instead of a full-sized HDMI port, you've got a micro HDMI port, so you'll need to spend $10 to $30 depending on what you get for an adapter if you want to plug in a VGA or HDMI monitor or display. And we've got an Ethernet jack here, which, if you're thinking, that doesn't look like an Ethernet jack, that's because you need also an adapter for that. That does come included in the case, though. There's also an SD card port, which I always forget about hanging out down here. On the bottom, you'll notice that it's pretty much a sealed case. We've got a couple of vents and speakers down here, but you don't have any access panels. So if you wanted to replace or upgrade the battery, or the RAM, or the storage, you're out of luck. Fortunately, it comes with 4 gigabytes of storage and a fairly fast 128 gigabyte solid-state disk. It doesn't provide as much storage as you're going to get with something that has a larger hard drive, but it's much faster storage, and so if you don't plan to put your entire music and movie collection on your laptop, it'll do. You'll notice it resumes from sleep pretty quickly. Type in my password here. And one of the main reasons that I was interested in this particular model over something else is because of the 1600 by 900 pixel display. And that's because if you take a look at the screen, you'll notice that I have a web page open here on one side and a word processor on the other, and there's plenty of room to do research in one window, writing in another window. That's something that's a little bit difficult to do with a smaller or lower resolution display like 1366 by 768. And Windows does allow you to change dot pitches, the DPI settings, but I find that 1600 by 900 on a 13-inch display, the default settings are pretty good. You don't really have to squint or hold the device too close to your face in order to make out text. Whereas 1920 by 1080, higher resolution on something this small, the text, the images, everything looks really tiny. And when you adjust the Windows DPI settings, it almost looks cartoonish. You know, certain things get bigger, other things don't. So I find 1600 by 900 to be a pretty good compromise for working on the go. This particular device runs Windows 8, ships with Windows 8, which means that you have a start screen instead of a start menu. And it, at first I was a little bit worried that it wouldn't be as easy to use, but it turns out in a lot of ways it's even easier than a traditional start menu. And not only can you customize it by putting icons for the things that you're going to use most often in the places where you use them most often, but you can really launch applications just by typing. So all you got to do if you want to launch something is hit the Windows button, start typing, and you can always get back to desktop mode. So even if you have no interest in full-screen Windows applications like the Bing News app or the weather application or calendar, you can use desktop mode and just sort of get used to using the new start screen. Now the other thing that you do have to get used to, though, is that settings like shutting down your device might take a little bit more work to get to, but it's still not too bad. Basically, there are touchscreen gestures or touchpad gestures that work pretty well. So this particular model does not have a touchscreen. I can't touch here and pinch to zoom or bring up the start menu or switch applications using the screen. Instead, you use the touchpad to do it, and that works pretty easily. So you swipe from the right for your Charms menu, swipe from the left to switch applications. I can use four-finger gestures to go back to the desktop. And from desktop mode, I can view the desktop or bring back the applications that I was just using. So you get used to those gestures pretty quickly, and if you wanted to use a plug-in USB mouse, you can always hover over the corners to access different things. So you can bring up the Charms menu by going to the left corner, bring up the Start menu by going to the right corner, or we can bring up a list of recent applications by hovering over the left side. So Windows 8, it's nice to have a touchscreen, but you don't necessarily need a touchscreen to get around. So in terms of, well, one more hardware thing I wanted to take a look at here is the keyboard. It's a fairly comfortable keyboard, doesn't have a lot of flex. The laptop has a magnesium alloy case. It looks a little bit like plastic, feels a little bit more like metal though, in that it gets cold when you're not using it and warms up a little bit when you are. The keyboard is a chiclet or island style keyboard, which, because of that magnesium alloy case, doesn't really bend that much when you push down towards the center. It does a little bit. It's a backlit keyboard, but because there's an ambient light sensor on, you can't really see the backlights right now. And this touchpad is nice and large and fairly easy to use, as I mentioned. In terms of overall performance, this guy has a Core i5 Sandy Bridge processor. It's not quite as fast as a newer Ivy Bridge CPU, but the biggest difference really is that newer processors have better graphics. So if we take a quick look here at, say, the Windows Experience Index, you'll notice that we've got a 4.3 score here, and the low score is on desktop graphics performance. 3D gaming graphics, surprisingly, are actually up at 5.9. CPU is at 6.4, so it's a fairly speedy chip. And when it comes to doing things like transcoding audio and video, it's actually the fastest computer I own right now, and that's because it's been a couple of years since I bought a new desktop computer. So even though this is a 17-watt dual-core processor designed for laptops, it's faster than the Core 2 Duo chip in my desktop computer, and now it's basically the first thing that I use when I need to encode a high-definition video. In terms of, like I said, the graphics performance not being stellar, I've noticed that some high-definition videos play back just fine, but there are some where the audio sort of starts to get a little bit glitchy when I'm watching video. So, and when you're, I guess this isn't the most exciting video I could have chosen here, but when you're watching video in full screen mode, for the most part things are good, but your CPU performance might spike a little bit, or CPU usage might spike a little bit. Speaking of CPU, Samsung offers an optimized power setting here, which basically sets the CPU limits when you're on battery power at about 50% utilization. And what that'll do is it'll let you get longer battery life. I find that in my tests I get about 5 to 6 hours of runtime. If you want full performance, it's a 1.4 gigahertz processor that actually goes up faster than 2 gigahertz in sort of burst speeds when necessary. When you're doing something like, say, transcoding a video, which takes a lot of CPU power, you can switch to high performance mode, and that'll run down your battery more quickly, but it'll use the full CPU. So it's nice to sort of have those options. In terms of overall software, this does have Windows. It does have a UEFI firmware instead of a traditional BIOS, and what that means is that Secure Boot is enabled by default, but you can disable Secure Boot, and if you go to the full review at lillipuding.com, you'll see that I was able to boot Linux, Mint, Ubuntu, other operating systems on this laptop as well, just by disabling Secure Boot and enabling sort of a legacy BIOS. It's a little bit tricky in terms of sort of how the Windows 8 handles the boot manager, so I haven't played too much with actually installing them on the hard drive, but I was able to boot them from a USB flash drive without any major problems. One of the coolest things I think about this overall system, though, is even with the fast boot turned off, thanks to the solid-state disk, Windows boot optimizations, and let me close this application first. Windows 8 boot optimizations and UEFI, it's reboots incredibly quickly. So let's take a quick look and show what it takes to shut down and restart. In general, I find that you can do a cold boot on this laptop in about 15 seconds. So we're booting Windows 8 in about the same amount of time as, let's restart anyway, in about the same amount of time as it takes to boot a Chromebook, which is running a stripped-down operating system that basically just supports a web browser. So here's Windows 8 rebooting on the Samsung Series 9. And while we watch this, I'll just remind you, I'm Brad Linder with Lillipuding, and this is the Samsung Series 9, sells for about $830, has a list price of $1,000, and offers a pretty nice combination, I think. And there you go, we're rebooted, of performance and price. This is Brad Linder with Lillipuding.